and welcome to Inner Shadow Work around the Wounded Masculine, the Christmas edition. Not entirely festive, however, I have learned a lot on this journey and I do want to share with you what was uncovered. And maybe as we're exploring some of the themes here, you might be able to relate with some of it. Maybe you'll be able to open up to new parts of yourself, bring new parts of you into light, and hopefully it will help you on your healing journey. I have a fear of intimacy that mostly seems to manifest around men and creativity. So, this has been fairly debilitating for many, many years now. It can result, it's so awkward to talk about this, but it often results in me feeling really uncomfortable, really nervous. I can get shaky and feel butterflies and almost have an actual fight or flight response that has me actually shaking in compulsively, like I can't help it. Basically, it has originated around the father figure, I feel, but it's also a lot of other energetics that I feel like are present in society. So having gone through the school system, where I think a lot of this sort of patriarchal influence is also very rife, and also having then gone into corporate and then slowly finding over time that a lot of my creativity has dried up due to being in these different environments. So if you're anything like me, back in 2018, 2019, when the divine feminine started to become a real thing, and everyone was really into it and everyone was doing all the shadow work and doing the reclaim of the goddess and all the different things. Well, I was very much doing this, and I have been doing this, and I do honestly continue to do this, but I have found that it wasn't really doing anything for me. Like, I'd be in these really nice group containers and everything's very nice and we connect with the goddess and it would be kind of pleasant and it would feel relaxing, but it wasn't actually transforming anything for me. It's almost as if I had this part of me inside that was like, oh, that's really cute that you're doing all this like really cute shadow work. Yeah, you keep trying doing that. So it was only when I was on a plant medicine journey, and plant medicine can tend to kick your ass around this sort of stuff, that I was going really deep into this particular fear that I have around intimacy and how it's manifesting. And I was called into the sense of polarity around the masculine and feminine. And what I heard is that the feminine is dangerous. And then as I was going deeper and deeper with that, I heard the feminine is dangerous, so she's worth controlling and repressing and suppressing. And it kind of hit me in that moment that actually all of this feminine work that I'm doing isn't going to do anything until I manage to heal and integrate the part that is saying this to me, which is the masculine part, the wounded masculine part that I've internalized. And I had this idea to spend 30 days really going deep into the shadow of this wounded masculine part of myself to see if I could actually finally do something about it, to actually shift it, to integrate it, to heal it, to do something with it, because it was just causing so many issues in my life. It's honestly been longer than 30 days now. It's probably been more like 60 days. But what I've been doing is for 1 hour to 2 hours in the evening, I've been sitting down, lit a candle, gone into meditation, had my journal with me, and I've just been exploring this wounded part of me. And so what I'm about to share with you is kind of like the story of what has unfolded and what I've learned. So let's go ahead, and I can't believe I'm sharing this publicly, but here we are. Hopefully I'll be able to look back on this and smile from a very healed and integrated place. So anyway, here we go. So when I first sat down with this, I just wanted to be taken somewhere. So I was inviting myself to be taken into something around this, so not knowing really where to start. And I found like this part of me, I found that this part of me started to reveal itself, and it was almost like a cowering, terrified kitten that was right up against a wall and like hissing and screaming and just like really, really scared. And I was asking it, what is it so afraid of? What is its biggest fear? And it was saying it's almost like a fate worse than death. And I was trying to go deeper and deeper with it to understand what was this fate that it felt like is worse than death. And what it said to me is complete annihilation, as in being obliterated from the face of existence. It was almost like it was saying it's okay to share fake or staged creativity because it's nothing real. It's nothing that's actually going to capture the eye of God and be seen in some way. This part, see, whatever it is, seemed to very much connect with that despotic, all seeing, all vengeful eye of God in some way. And somehow that part could cut you down for displeasing him. And everything felt like this lose-lose situation. So I asked this part when it started to feel this way. And it essentially said, when I realized that when my own free will would meet the free will of the Father, that it didn't count for anything. So it's almost as if this part's free will in the face of the Father's free will was completely ineffectual. It was impotent. It was almost as if it was witnessing the feminine free will, which was the mother's free will, which would never count for anything, which would never actually affect any change in reality in any way, which was very similar to the dynamic that I was seeing with my mother and father. So somehow this part has become internalized. It was hard for me to connect the terrorizing father with the terrorizing God in some way, but it's like this part said back to me, you weren't there, you don't know how bad it was, as if you don't know what it's like to be energetically stamped on over and over and over again. So it was impossible for this part to say sovereign, like it had to split out in order to protect itself. So at this point, I wasn't really aware of what it had split into. All I knew is there was just this one part that was cowering and terrified of a god perceiving it in some way and annihilating it. So in subsequent sessions over the period of time I've been doing this shadow work, this part named itself Hellbivore. As I was spending more time with this part, I noticed that it was dodging something, like, and it was trying to hide or obscure something behind it or underneath it in some way. And it was only when I was probing deeper and I was like, hey, what are you hiding there? What's underneath you? That it was like getting really panicky and fearful. And that's when I noticed that it was keeping in the shadows or protecting in some way. This very dulled, almost, it was an energetic or feminine energetic that was in this kind of stupor, almost as if it was under anesthetic in some way. And she called herself Grace. So that's what I'll refer to her from now on, this kind of suppressed energetic, feminine energetic. I asked Hellbivore, what does he need to do to release the suppression of what he's doing to the feminine energetic of Grace? So he said he doesn't trust God, so that wouldn't work. Is there any kind of thing that pleases you, that almost like a carrot that could entice you to let her go? And he said that he couldn't do that because it'll take him away from his post where he's guarding her, and take his eye off the ball. So that's not going to be something that he could do. I felt like I couldn't do any kind of healing work on it because healing is the exact thing that it's terrified of, because it's trying to avoid the eye of God. So bringing healing into it in that way would just basically terrify it. And then I explained, hey, the father figure isn't around anymore. So that being that has mostly created this dynamic that you're experiencing isn't here to threaten you anymore. To which it responded, well, if there's one, there'll be others. So that didn't work. And ultimately, the only thing that I felt like could maybe persuade it to release the suppression of this feminine part would be to have the feminine part request in a very direct, strongly held, heartfelt way the request that he would not do that anymore. I'm not quite sure exactly what her request would be, but the only thing that would have him shift or change or do anything in any way would be if it was coming from her, this part that he is repressing. Nothing else felt like it would work. However, because she'd been so suppressed for such a long time, at this particular moment, it didn't feel like anything that she could ask would have enough strength, would have enough heart behind it, because she was just so drowsy and almost like under anesthetic that nothing would feel strong enough or real enough for him to actually affect any change, or for him to feel like she had it, like she had enough strength to continue whatever iteration of what she would be on the other side. But then it was a bit of a catch-22 because he's the one that's caused her to be like this in the first place. And then a new part in this entire dynamic revealed herself to me, and she called herself Lily. Now, Lily is a very conscious, feminine aspect of me. It's almost like she's the front-facing feminine, while this other feminine part, Grace, is kind of hidden and suppressed underneath Helbivore. And what I started to try and do was facilitate a conversation between Lily, this very conscious feminine part, and Helbivore, which is this wounded, masculine, protective part of Grace. Just trying to understand how their dynamic works. And it essentially felt like she was quite irritated and angry that she's had to be doing so much front-facing work because of all of the decisions that this masculine part had been making, to which he acknowledged that yes, that's actually what's been happening. This is literally like a soap opera. He also said that she can hold her own so well, so he didn't need to worry about her being irreparably damaged from the masculine father figure. So he didn't need to, so she was kind of angry she didn't have as much attention for such a long time. But he was saying, well, you don't really need it because you can hold your own so well. In some later sessions, when I was connecting with Lily, she was pretty freaking terrifying. Like, she was raving and angry and like this vicious, like the worst kind of feminine wounding that I think you can ever see. Just like so angry and bitter and just emasculating and really kind of scary, to be honest. And it was interesting because she's kind of like one of my most conscious parts. So that's happening. I feel like I have some kind of dampener in there to make, if she's so front facing, to allow me to even have friends, because she's pretty freaking terrifying. And what I felt like I was doing at that point was trying to understand what Lily, this front-facing feminine, needs. And you know when you just have that part of you that's just like, I hate this and I hate that, and just like complaining about everything. I'm like, yeah, but what do you actually want? And it's almost like they're so concerned and consumed with what is irritating and aggravating that they don't even know what they actually want. But finally, I managed to get her to say or to reveal that the thing that she's craving is for Helbivore, this masculine part, to be bigger than her. So I was like, well, that's great, but you're spending so much of your time emasculating him. I was asking her at that point, well, what needs to happen for him to become bigger than you, which is what you want? She's like, unacceptable. There is no way in his current state that part can become bigger than me. So what she's really craving is for this really delicious, divine masculine to come in and hold her, which at this current point in time, Helbivore, which is the masculine part of me at this point, isn't actually embodying. So she's not feeling safe for him to become bigger than her so that he can hold her energy. So I felt like at a certain point in all this, Helbivore was apologizing to Lily for his behavior, for how he kind of has basically dragged on this whole wounded masculine and all of the manifestations of it, this energetic to protect Grace for such a long period of time. And he's overlaid it over so many things that has affected my life since he's a part of me. So he basically apologized to Lily for having to shoulder a lot of the fallout of that. But it was in time I started to see a very weak character around this particular masculine part, in that he would really boost up and highlight the good things that he was doing and how he was there protecting and trying to ensure the stability of the overall system. But he would also play down the weaknesses that also came with that decision. So to give you an example, he'd say, you know, I was only protecting you, I'm protecting the system, I'm protecting Grace, which is true. And he's also protecting his pride and his decision making and wanting to keep face. So he wouldn't talk about that part, even though that was a huge reason why he was being protective as part of this overall decision making. And then he'd also say, oh, you know, I was scared of losing you, I was scared of her getting hurt, I was scared of the system being hurt, which was true. And he also had a lot of inertia around his decision making. He had this fear of being wrong, so he kind of be a little bit cowardly and drag it on way longer than it needed to go for. So there's this really unfortunate character flaw of this masculine part of me, that what it's saying was true, but also there were other parts that were true that it was kind of downplaying, that wasn't really giving, almost a bit of smoke and mirrors. Like it wasn't giving you this full picture of what was actually happening. So it was actually hard. It was a bit tricky. Like it was a bit hard to know what was completely true and what were its total motives around certain things. I could see him actively hiding that as I was having these conversations. So as I'm connecting deeper with Grace, so this part that has been suppressed by Hell before, she's so underdeveloped. She's had no interaction really with the world, very, very sheltered. And when I connect with what I felt like this energetic was of Grace, is that she feels like the raw creative expression and the creative raw material in some way that actually makes things, that feminine chaos that is just all the things before it becomes a thing, like an actual object, basically. So as I was connecting with Grace, I could sense the huge amount of loss that she feels. It's almost like she's been locked in this basement for such a long time, and she's for like 20 years, and she's had no experience of life. She's underdeveloped. She hasn't had the sun on her face and the ability to move her muscles and actually build strength. So it's almost like she's a baby and she's starting from scratch, and there's a kind of a real grief and a real loss. However, the silver lining in all of this is that she's so preserved. She's so pristine. The image that's coming to me now is almost like a mummified being that's just perfectly preserved thousands of years later. In a way, Helbivore, who's been protecting her from the wounded masculine energetics of the world coming in, has achieved his goal, even though it's kind of come with a huge consequence and a lot of sacrifice along the way. She is still preserved. She hasn't been fragmented and broken. So at that point, I felt like I was facilitating a conversation between Helbivore's masculine protective part and Grace's creative function. And it seemed to me that he wants her to forgive him, but she doesn't want to forgive him because what has changed? He's still going to be controlling. He's still going to be suppressing. So she's not willing to forgive him when he doesn't actually know how to do anything different or anything better. So I could feel a bit of a stalemate or a standoff between those two parts. And I should also say that at a certain point in all of this, I felt like there is another part that has split off from Grace, and he feels like he was calling himself the architect, and he was a very kind of slim European, very flamboyant. You know those artists that were completely broke, but they were just living their best life while they were living in Montpellier, I think it's called, or it's this particular quarter of Paris where they're just so creative and just like living like in a studio flat or like in a bed sit, but it doesn't matter because they're just living in their creative indulgence and they're just enjoying all the pleasures of life. He felt like that. So he was kind of like flamboyant, masculine, but also very connected with his creative feminine energy. So I felt like he was very bitter, very annoyed, and very feeling like he'd been so shortchanged because he's a split off part of Grace, who's the pure creative function. He's the architect that turns her creative raw function into things. So he gets to flex and build and create and make the raw material of Grace into things. So because she's been so suppressed for so long, he's over here feeling like all of my gifts have gone unused, unexercised, let's say. And so he feels very redundant, and he's really angry about that because he feels like he's got so many gifts to share with the world. So I felt like the architect, I'm going to call him, was also part or a split off function from Grace, and has just been made redundant and is over here. We're several weeks in to this process at this point, hours and hours of exploration into the shadow later around the wounded masculine here. And what I'm starting to realize is that the main problem, let's say, here is really is Helbivore, is the masculine, the wounded masculine function that's been very reactive, yeah, to the wounded, let's say, father archetype, perhaps, and is really almost like batting away many of the incoming pains that come with the wounded masculine archetype, but then also that he's come to embody many of them as well. He's never been trained. He doesn't know anything about the sacred masculine energetics, so he just doesn't know what to do. He's trying to do his best, but he just doesn't know what on earth is going on, and he's really getting it wrong, but understandably so. And the thing is that he doesn't want to be seen in all of these failures that he seems to be creating. So I can see that he's feeling a huge amount of shame for not knowing how to be a man and not knowing how to hold a woman or the feminine, the internal feminine, properly. And in a way, because of his actions, even though he's got his best interests and their best interests at heart, he feels like he's dooming them, going back to that original point of being sent back to the primordial soup of creation. His behavior, and even though he's got the best intent, is dooming them to total annihilation. So what I felt like this part needed to do, Helbivore, is to forgive himself for just not knowing about sacred masculine energetics, just having no example of it to even know what's best to do, and feeling okay with the bad decisions that have resulted because of that. And I felt in that moment that shame was revealing itself to the consciousness of God or the creator. And given that his worst fear is annihilation from the creator for being faulty in some way, it seemed to me that the reaction of the creator or the consciousness of God in that moment was kind of neutral, tending towards loving, certainly tending towards acknowledgement and almost a bit of thanks for actually revealing this energetic. So I felt like Helbivore in that moment felt like all of this dodging and avoiding and feigning and trying to just avoid the eye of God and being seen as faulty and corrupted and being sent back to the primordial soup wasn't worth it. Like, it was sore in that way. It's like, oh my gosh, I can't be making so much drama here, because the eye of God came upon him in that moment, and he was just like, that was not worth it. So what I was learning at this point, so many weeks in, is that the main issue, the main shadow, the main thing that's stopping all the parts integrating and working and articulating properly is the masculine aspect, this aspect, Helbivore. So I then felt like a bit of a healing process coming in around the sacred masculine, and it was an interesting energy. It felt firm but supple was the way that I would phrase it. Normally the masculine inside feels very concrete like, it's like meeting a brick wall, very hard, whereas this one felt almost like Bruce Lee, just like very nimble but strong, and and the best real life thing that I can use to articulate it would be like the skin of a drum, like a well-oiled, well-waxed skin of a drum that's like taut and strong and firm, but it's supple, like it's got movement to it. So that's what an aspect of the sacred masculine healing, as it was coming in here, felt like it embodied that energetic somewhat. So basically, because Helbivore feels like, I'm doing all of this, I'm not only like, I'm trying to help, but I seem to not only just be making things neutral, but actually making them worse. Like he's feeling a huge amount of shame, a very bad self-esteem, feeling at a loss, feeling like he has poor leadership, and ultimately he's feeling like a liability. And liabilities are really prone to destruction. So that's what he's fearing at this point. And he's afraid that the feminine's response to what he's doing and how he's trying to help and how he's trying to hold and support, even though he's completely getting it wrong, is really only shining light on his ineptitude, which is more likely to show how much of a liability he is, which is more likely to mean that he's going to be destroyed. The reason why he needs to suppress, control, destroy the feminine, as was coming through way back in my plant medicine journey, is that her misery only serves to highlight his ineptitude, which then means that he's only putting a spotlight upon him for destruction. So it's almost like he lowers the benchmark of his own behavior in order to feel safe, which then makes him less of a liability, which means that he's less likely to be destroyed by creation itself. And the energetic I was feeling was like, he just feels so stupid. Like, he feels like he's in this class and he's asking these, like, he wants to ask these really basic questions about the masculine. He's like, in this masculine, like, I'm here to learn about the masculine. I'm in class and everyone's asking these like really high-end questions, like really complex questions. And he feels like he just wants to ask the most basic question. But when you just feel like you're going to ask that question, everyone's going to go quiet. They're going to turn around and be like, oh my God, you are so stupid. I can't believe you're asking that question. Like, that's what the class of reality feels like to this masculine part right now. So I feel kind of sorry for him. I feel like he really just wants to learn about the sacred masculine, but he's just feeling like, oh, I know what I'm doing. I'm like putting on this bravado, but he just literally has no idea what he's doing and why he seems to be making everything worse. It was interesting because I feel like he's very angry at reality itself. It's almost like, oh, why does reality just always ask for this blind faith, but it never seems to give anything back? It never does, and it doesn't create this continuous, predictable next step. So you would even have any blind faith. And he says that that's what causes all of this control, that he has to control reality because of the nature of reality itself, that it's asking blind faith, but yet it gives nothing back in return. So it was almost like it was trying to justify the level of control that it tries to exert on reality. And I could sense that there was also this jealousy that reality itself doesn't seem to need to exert so much control and force over reality itself. So I could feel it was almost such a weird thing to be actually the masculine part of me to be jealous of the level of influence that reality itself, creation, has over itself. I heard reality won't entertain causation from the wounded parts of you, as that's accepting your least powerful self as a signal for truth. It won't expand from this place. This is what reality stands for. So what I essentially got from that is that this part is so wounded. It's trying to exert all this control and all this influence. Like, why isn't it working? Why isn't it working? It's like, well, reality won't let you create from that space of so much wounding. It's not going to give you the effects of your cause if you're coming from such a wounded place. So that felt like a bit of a shake to my to this herbivore part, this masculine part, that it's basically like reality is stopping you from expanding from that space because you're in such a wounded space. You need to embody these sacred masculine energetics before you can expand. Otherwise, you're just expanding from this wounded footing. So in a way, at this moment, I was asking, okay, so this need to control is the effect, but what is the cause? And that's when I feel like it comes back to, this patriarchal stuff, the wounded father archetype, a lot of the narcissism and control and domination that has come from a lot of those wounded aspects that I've personally experienced. And from my own personal history, the sense that my own will against the masculine is actually sort of fairly pointless, that it doesn't actually yield any influence, which, if you can think that I'm dealing with this herbivore aspect and Grace is the one underneath it, that's actually been what my personal experience has been. So it's almost like the will of the father, the will of the masculine, this almost like biblical male god type. It's like you're so little and small and you just have you're ineffective in the face of all of it. So then I was wondering, what is the overarching theme in all of this? And it's essentially really being penetrated non-consensually by life itself. And as a result of that, the sacred feminine, so the grace aspect that's underneath all of this, getting irreversibly, irrevocably damaged in some way. And so this fear creates this neurotic sense of needing to control things and exert influence over myself, over others, where they might have some kind of power over me, over reality itself. So this just like compulsive need to control and fearing intimacy, particularly with the masculine, because those are the results are this feeling of non-consensual penetration by life itself. And so the one of the core beliefs here is that I feel like I'm living with is that we live in a non-consensual universe. This is what I feel like has been the impact of the wounded masculine and the various wounded masculine archetypes that I've experienced through my life. And that is that the universe does what it wants, does what it pleases, doesn't really refer to your will, doesn't seek your consent with anything, and that you're basically being maneuvered for its own will, for its own desires, for its own pleasures and its own outcomes. And you may or may not get what you want in that, but either way, you're not being referred to or consulted in any way in that process. So as I was exploring even deeper this masculine dynamic, this Hellbivore character, at first I felt like he was self-serving and narcissistic and domineering and all of these different things. But really, one of the closest, none of those quite felt like they were right. The closest vibration I felt like this inner masculine had was to slave driver. It's trying to commoditize the feminine in some way. I sense that on the deepest levels, as I'm doing all this shadow work, is that the masculine commoditizes the feminine. The masculine uses his commodities to his own ends for his own uses. And the masculine using his commodities doesn't refer to your needs in any way, shape, or form. So then I need to ask myself, what part of you feels like you're commoditizing yourself? What part of you feels like you're seeing yourself or parts of yourself as slaves or a slave or slaves? And what part of you feels like you don't refer to your own needs in any circumstance? So then I was thinking of manifestations of this in the actual real world. So one way that I feel like I'm doing this is that, almost using my creative function and churning out creations for, when we're on places like Instagram or Facebook, where you're churning out these creations almost like a slave driver, like for a particular commoditized purpose, such as likes, interactions, engagement, overarchingly, attention. I feel like it often happens around making myself look good for men. And obviously, a lot of this is the energetics behind it. Not that the act of doing that in itself is commoditization, but I feel like sometimes the energetics of how I'm approaching it personally have that feeling of commoditizing myself for men in some way. I also feel like I behave in this way when I'm in the ebb, when I'm in a creative ebb. I'll not rest. I'll almost be whipping myself like a straight slave driver to be doing it in a way that's unnatural for me in that particular moment. So really at the root of it is this internal masculine is seeing me or aspects of me as a commodity, which means it's something it can trade, it's something that it possesses. So therefore I'm kind of extracting value from myself as a commodity, using myself in some way without any need for reciprocation, to give back in any way. And there's probably a part of me inside of all this that feels like I'm only as valuable as what I'm actually producing. So what I was doing in this particular session, oh God, it's so uncomfortable, is I'm looking up what is a commodity. So commodity comes from the word commodus, which means proper, fit, appropriate, convenient, satisfactory. And modus comes from measure. What I'm doing is continuously measuring myself or parts of myself against something that's fit or appropriate or suits needs in some way. And so it's essentially how convenient are parts of myself to this masculine energetic. Oh God, it's so gross. But hey, this is shadow work. We're looking at these parts. A slave is a person of legal property of another that is forced to obey them. So the internal implication of this is that there are parts of me that have to obey or be punished, and there's some kind of power dynamic here of subservience in some way. And so I feel like what Hellbivore is doing here with the grace part, which is the creative part, is that since she's the sort of raw creative material that exists within me, or maybe not within me, but maybe she's a channel through which it actually comes through. As a commodity, commodities tend to be stolen, usually from Earth, i.e. the feminine. I feel like a lot of this actually comes down to consent. Like there's an internal dynamic that's very wounded inside of me around consent. How does this have to do with consent? Well, if I'm a commodity, I can be used, traded, sold in some way internally. So all of that, of course, comes without consent. If there's parts of me that, if the masculine side feels like a slave driver, then, well, a slave is owned and subservient, so there's no consent there. Within this, there's a lot around value, produce, how much you can yield as a result of the commodities produce being realized in some way. So all of that is a function of, well, it's kind of outside of consent, because it's just about what you can produce to a particular ends of the ownership part of you. So I feel like there's a lot in this that is very performative. There's a feminine part of me that's performing, oh god, it's so gross, that is performing for its life, performing for its destiny, performing for its meal ticket in some way, being treated like an object, being used like a commodity. So in some way I'll be squeezed dry for my use and then disposed of. And of course, as all of this really nice dynamic is happening inside of me, it's going to be projected outward in how I'm interacting with the world. So here's what I've learned so far in this really delightful process, is that I have a very conscious feminine part called Lily. She's looking for masculine holding, particularly from Helbivore, and is not willing to surrender to this holding until Helbivore really learns how to embody some sacred masculine energetics. Until then, she's going to be emasculating, condescending, and provoking, and really probably quite vindictive. The unconscious part of the creative function in its raw state is called grace, and she is extremely suppressed, extremely underdeveloped, has been protected and shielded from the incoming masculine energetics from the environment that's been around me. And so whilst, yes, she is suppressed and completely underdeveloped, she's also in a fairly pristine condition. Grace's counterpart is the architect. He's feeling very angry and underused and redundant because Grace has been so suppressed, so he's had none of the raw material to actually build things in reality. And the central figure in this, the one that's kind of running the show in ways and influencing every single aspect, is the wounded masculine functionality, which is called Helbivore. His central theme is shame and incompetency, suppression of the feminine, protection, a coping mechanism of protection. And he is terrified of being sent back to the primordial soup of creation for being seen as incompetent. So he's doing a lot of gymnastics in order to ensure that that doesn't happen. But at the heart of it all, he has absolutely no idea what it means to be in his sacred masculine energetic. He's completely making up as he's going along, getting it very, very wrong, and feeling like the worst student in the school of the sacred masculine. So the core thing that needs to happen, from what I can see, is for Helbivore to learn what sacred masculine energetics are about, embody them so that he can rise and become bigger than Lily and hold her so that she feels held and safe and can fulfill her function. It will also allow him to interact with Grace and hold and support her and allow her release the pressure from on top of her so that she can then flourish, which will then, as she's flourishing, the architect will then rise and have things within her raw creative power to actually be working with. If this is all going to result in complete integration, I'm not really sure yet. I'm still working my way through it. This is actually a live thing that I'm still doing. I might be way beyond 30 days now, but I've got to keep going until I get the whole thing resolved. So what I feel like is I'm going to call in more codes and more understanding for Helbivore around the sacred masculine so that he can embody that and uphold the creative function of the whole here. And whether they remain as articulated parts working together in a really kind of fluid way, or they completely integrate into one whole, I don't really know just yet. The central theme in all of this is that my wounded masculine is causing the most disruption in the whole system. And once that is addressed first, then the sacred feminine parts will feel safe enough to be able to engage with their own energetics, with his own energetics, and come into their flourishing. So that's me for my 30 days. Oh my God, it's so exhausting, of shadow work into the wounded masculine. If any of this speaks to you and you have seen it on time, and I'm currently still offering it, I invite you to join me in really what has been the creative uprising as a result of this process, and also the fact that it's been going back for many years to that original plant medicine journey. And it's called Held, and it's all about rebirthing the inner masculine energetic within you. If you've been on this path for a while, and if you're anything like me and you've been engaging with the goddess and the divine feminine and receiving and la-di-da-di-da, and it kind of works but not really, and there's a lot that feels like isn't quite landing for you, or it's not quite working, it may be, might not be, but it may be that it's the masculine function within you, the masculine energetic, that needs tending to as much attention and care as you've been given to the rising and awakening of your sacred feminine aspect. Maybe like me, she's struggling to come through because he isn't in the right energetic internally within you to hold her and welcome her and help her to feel safe to land and arrive within you. So I really hope you've seen this on time, because I'm going to be offering it live in January. And if you click in the description box below, you will be taken to the offer page. You can have a read through, see if any of it really lands for you, if it makes sense for you. And hopefully I'll see you there. And we're really going to go deep into your Akashic records and into the shamanic work that's needed, the real visceral somatic work, to really make a shift and change around this masculine energetic. So hopefully I will see you there. The link is in the description box. Thank you so much for listening in and really being prepared, if you've reached this point, to know the depth of how much this energetic is influencing us. You're an absolute luminary leader and ushering in this new paradigm if you've made it this far. So thank you so much. Since we're going to be using the Akashic records within Held, I invite you to watch this video next, because I feel like that'll be really supportive of some of the tools and insights and ways of working in the Akashic field that we'll be using within the Held container. So that will kind of get you a bit ready and prepared for some of the work we'll be doing there. Thank you so much, and I will see you over here.